So Apple released their fall lineup. This is their every year. This is what they do. Here's why it matters this year. So number one, Apple is continuing to invest in health tech. I know that's not what most people are saying is number one. Most people are saying AI is number one, but I'm here to tell you the health tech, I think, matters more for them. The health tech is where they are a market leader. It's where they are driving a lot of incremental revenue long term over the next decade. They're investing in two big areas in health tech that they wanted to call out. Number one, the Apple Watch. They're just straight up branding this as the device for a healthy life on the website. They're going after sleep apnea with this release, where the device will check if you have sleep apnea. It's a life-threatening condition, and you can know that now and go after it. Now, I know there's some stuff that they haven't been able to get to that they've wanted to. A blood pressure monitor is one that comes to mind. These are hard technical problems. Apple tends to solve these problems incrementally. And so when they have something that they can solve and release to the public that's safe, like a sleep apnea detector, they'll go for it. And they will wait until they're absolutely sure they have some of the other health features that are bigger, flashier, like the blood pressure monitor, and eventually get to it. And this is especially so because they're now in the health space, and that's regulated differently. They had to wait for FDA clearance for their earbuds before they could start to really talk about them as a hearing aid. And so I think Apple Legal had like a lot of fun figuring out the exact positioning to sort of tell the public we have built a hearing aid without telling the public we have built a hearing aid. That, like, they use that language, but they use it very carefully. So that brings me to the AirPods, which is now moving into the health device space as well, because it is something that will give you a hearing test. It will allow you to selectively hear, which is actually a lot of what a hearing aid does. So you can filter out certain noise, like the little advertisement had you being able to filter out the baby crying or the dog yapping, which if you have a corgi, it's nice to be able to filter out the noise of the corgi barking. So that may be one I go for. But the point is that the AirPod is now not just a music listening device, which is, of course, what Apple built their bread and butter on for so long. It is also now a hearing device for people who have hearing loss. And that is going to get millions of people who would not walk into an ear doctor to test their ears, an audiologist. They're going to be able to have a audio test in the privacy of their home, be able to improve their hearing, and it's going to functionally change dinner tables. Like, you are going to see conversations that used to take place just disappearing. Hey, Dad, I have to say this over and over again. And then you raise your voice and, like, Dad thinks you're fighting, etc. Like, those kinds of family interactions are going to be different if the AirPod is widely adopted in a way that the hearing aid never has been. So I'm really curious to watch that. And I think that's one of those longer term bets that Apple's making, particularly as their core market in the US ages up. So health tech is a big space. Covered AirPod, covered Apple Watch. Let's talk about iPhone. This is where most people lead because this is obviously their anchor product. I think that this is the first effectively required upgrade for the iPhone in the last few years, like maybe in the last 5. And the reason for that is that a lot of the features that Apple is unlocking that are really flashy are just not going to be possible on existing iPhone models. If I hold up this iPhone model, I can't get the cool stuff on it. I can't get that visual intelligence search that Apple demoed, where you can take a picture of the cafe and see what the cafe is, right? Or take a picture of the dog and see what the dog breed is. You don't get that kind of cool experience. You don't get that extra button that allows you to do visual search that they decided to debut, which, by the way, Apple debuting a button is a big deal because they absolutely hate buttons. And so they must have decided this was really important in user testing to go after it. And the camera's coming along too. And so one of the things that's interesting is, like, Apple has been known, like, the iPhone is basically a fancy camera that has a phone bolted onto it. And Apple has been known for improving the camera, but always being like a touch behind some of the cutting edge phones from other device makers. This whole move into visual search and also sort of moving up to 4K is something we have seen from other device makers. If you've been watching, Google has been out there with ads on visual search and visual, basically artificial intelligence for your camera for the last few months. They are doing NFL ads on Google Gemini 9 and how cool it is and how it's not just another phone. Apple had to have that in mind when they were thinking about this. They had to be thinking, how do we start to capture market imagination with this phone? And they did it in typically Apple fashion, emphasizing the unified quality of this phone where the hardware and the software blend seamlessly. It can go back into your photos in a really easy way so that you can go back and you can search in complex text. And now you're using AI for text, not just AI for images. And you can describe that you want the dog climbing the stairs, and you'll see pictures of your corgi climbing the stairs. So where I'm going with this is that Apple had to reposition the product to be a market leader this year. And they had to do so in a way that drove an upgrade cycle because they need to continue to drive iPhone purchases to retain profitability. And so for them, limiting a lot of these features to iOS 18 and making it very clear that you need the special chip and you need the special hardware, and there's certain things you're not going to get if you do not get this iPhone, should drive a significant upgrade cycle. People are going to want to buy the new iPhone. And yes, I know some of you out there are like, well, why would they do that when the Google Gemini is right there and it has a lot of these visual search capabilities, etc. Apple has a brand. That's really the answer. Like, Apple has a brand. People are sort of connected to the Apple. They have a Mac. Like, that's why. And so they're giving people who are loyal to the brand a strong reason to respond. All right, last but not least, I want to call out that the LLM stuff is going to be really interesting. It will probably lead to the single greatest use of LLMs that we've seen, because tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people who have previously not been going to ChatGPT will have that functionality effectively on their phone. But because Apple has been locking it off for privacy, it is not going to feel like the smart ChatGPT that some of us who are using the 4.0 model or Claude Sonnet are used to. It is, I think it's going to feel dumber. And I am really curious to see how that actually works in practice with summaries, with Compose, and how that affects usage. It feels like a lot of people are going to try it, and I'm really curious to see if people use it, or if, kind of like Siri and Alexa, it falls by the wayside because it's just not smart enough to be useful. And that could deal a blow to the perception of AI, because this is something that a lot of people are going to be using because it's built into their device versus having to remember to go to a website like ChatGPT. So that's my big takeaway. Apple's moving into health tech. I still think that's the biggest number one story. I think number two is driving a monster upgrade cycle with the iPhone. And I think number three is talking about the AI sort of space and where Apple is going and how Apple's being very cautious. In fact, arguably, they did more on the visual Apple Intelligence side than on the LLM side. But it's still going to lead to a lot of usage, and I'm really curious to see how that unfolds, just because they have such a monster device footprint. So we will see. Stay tuned. That's my takedown of Apple's strategy behind this year's release.